variation for white. Believe it or not, there are other variations that white can play against the dragon. Maybe not quite as serious, but you might see these variations nonetheless. So today we're going to talk about the classical system, bishop e2. Now, this is a very solid move. It's not anywhere near as dangerous as the Yugoslav attack, but it's very solid for white and certainly playable. So the plan for today, I'm going to outline this move bishop e2 and the ideas for white, and I'm going to show how there are two different ideas that white can normally use in this variation, and talk about the plans for black and how black can react to this system by white. And then I want to show fragments of two different games in each system. If you'd like to play over the whole game, the PGNs will be available, but I just want to talk about the plans for black playing against the system in the opening and middle game. So after bishop e2, black should respond naturally with bishop g7. White will castle normally, and black can also castle or play knight c6. So say, for example, black castles. Here there are two main ideas for white. One is to put the bishop on e3, and the other is to put the bishop on g5. And these systems have their differences. So bishop e3 is a very typical plan, and white can play the setup against basically any Sicilian, where he just puts the bishops on e2, e3, castles, and plays for f4. There's nothing magical that black can do to crack the setup. It's a very solid setup for white, and he can play it against any Sicilian variation. So the main idea for black is to develop his knight, develop his bishop, and make use of the c-file. The rook is always very powerful on the c-file in the Sicilian. It's one of the great things about playing the Sicilian is the way that black rook can dominate the c-file. So if white plays something like f4 here, is risky because black can play queen b6, where the knight on d4 is pinned to the bishop. The only square the knight can go to would be f5, and a lot of times the idea is to take on b2 and to win a pawn. So very often in this position, white will start, after black's knight comes to c6, white will start by playing knight b3, which will avoid any of those queen b6 moves and avoid the trade of the knights. And after the knight goes back to b3, black can simply play bishop e6. It's a very good square for the bishop. White would normally continue f4, taking space on the king side. And here, there are two main ideas. Either black can play queen c8, which is a little offbeat, putting the queen on the c-file. And here the idea is to bring the black rook to the d-file and try to play d5. Of course, the black rook is very strong on the d-file where it x-rays white's queen. But there's also a line here where black can simply play rook c8, and I tend to prefer this line. I think, in this case, keeping it simple is usually very strong. The rook on the c-file is always so strong in the dragon, and here, black's idea is to go knight a5. If white trades on a5, black's very happy to bring his queen out and get it active, and then after playing knight a5, black can try to bring either his knight or his bishop into c4. So these are the ideas for black in playing against the bishop e2, bishop e3 system. Let's talk about what if white plays, instead of bishop e3, bishop g5. So here the system's a little different. The bishop being on g5 has the point where in some positions it can trade for the knight on f6, and then white can try to bring his knight into d5, sometimes with tempo. For example, if black's queen is on c7, that's one idea. And also later, white will probably try for f4 and e5, where after the knight moves, the bishop can target the e7 pawn. So after bishop g5, black would normally continue still with knight c6. Very often, white plays the same knight b3, avoiding the trade, and we see the same kind of setup. And here, white needs to usually be careful and play king h1 at some point if he intends to play f4. If he just plays f4 now, black's going to use the main idea here to start with a5, playing against this knight on b3 by trying to push to a4 and harass that knight, and then maybe bring the pawn all the way to a3 and break apart white's queen side. So white will stop this by playing a4, but now black has a very nice post for his knight. He can go knight to b4. And now white has to be very careful. If he were to continue with a natural move like queen to d2, black has a tactic he can use to gain a nice advantage here. So if you're interested, pause your videos and see if you can find the idea here for black. Black can take advantage of the fact that white hasn't moved his king to h1 by the tactical shot knight takes c2, after which white will recapture, and black goes queen b6 check, forking the king and the knight, again taking advantage of that open king on g1. So normally here, white will play king h1 before he goes f4, but black continues with the same plan to go a5, and after white goes a4, to play knight b4, to play rook c8, and try to pressure white on the queen side. And remember, in this line, this move 6, bishop e2 for white, the classical variation, the stakes are much, much lower than the Yugoslav attack. Here, if black makes a mistake, maybe white will get a little bit of an advantage, but it's not a life or death scenario the way every move in the Yugoslav attack is. Here, the kings are castled to the same side, the position is much more calm, black needs to simply calmly find a plan and try to play his way into a good position. So, now I'm going to show fragments from two interesting games. So in the first game, it's a game between two grandmasters. White is Stefan Kinderman, and black is Miso Sabalo. So this game started kind of a roundabout way. Black actually played knight c6 on move 2, and played the accelerated dragon, not the actual dragon, but the position quickly transposed to the classical dragon. Here, white played bishop e2, after bishop g7, knight b3, knight f6, knight c3, d6, castles, and we're right back in familiar territory, which is the position that we just talked about. So here, black castles, white plays first king h1, bishop e6, and now f4, and after rook c8, bishop e3, we're right back in the position where white put the bishops on e2 and e3. So black played knight to a5, the idea that we discussed, and white played f5, taking space on the king side and pressuring the bishop, and here black played very natural, bishop to c4. So black's idea is simply to trade off the light square bishops and then bring his knight into c4, where it will be an absolute terror, attacking the bishop on e3 and the pawn on b2. White played bishop d3. Now if black trades the bishops, at least white can take back with the pawn and deny the knight the c4 square. And black played a6, preparing to play b5 and take space on the king side. White played queen e1, trying to transfer his queen to the king side to try to get some kind of attack. But black played very quickly and sharply here. He traded the bishops, traded the knights, and pushed d5, a powerful breakthrough in the center. White played bishop g5, And now black played d4, forcing the knight to leave and fully opening the file for his rook. Bishop takes f6, and simply pawn takes c3. Black didn't want to recapture on f6 here and allow the knight to jump to d5, so he took the knight. Bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, pawn takes on c3, and queen takes on d3. So after the dust settles, black has a little bit better position because his pieces are very active and there's a lot of pressure on white's pawns. And here black is able to win a pawn after getting the queen into c2. White played queen h4, and black fearlessly captures the pawn on c3. Have I ever mentioned that you have to be a little bit fearless to play the dragon? Rook to f2, queen takes on b3, and queen takes e7. It looks like white has some pressure against black's king, but after queen b6, f6 check, and simply king g8, white didn't have enough compensation for black's extra pawn, and using excellent technique, black was able to grind out the win in the endgame. And now I want to show an interesting game where white plays the bishop g5 line in the classical variation, and I played black myself in this game against the young international master, Daniel Naroditsky, who's a very talented player, and I know a former world champion for his age. So Naroditsky played e4, and I played the dragon. And Naroditsky surprised me a bit by playing bishop e2 here. I was kind of expecting him to go for the Yugoslav attack. So I played bishop g7, castles, knight c6, knight b3, castles, and now bishop to g5, choosing this line. So I continue with bishop e6, king h1. Remember, important for white to play that move usually if he intends to play f4. And I went ahead and played a5. So with the idea to play a4, so my opponent played a4, preventing the idea. Rook c8, f4, and knight b4. Very typical ideas in this position. So here, white played f5, and I had to think a little bit. So I have one option here to play bishop c4 and try to trade bishops and have a normal position. And bishop c4 seems like a good option, but I wanted to try for a little bit more here. So I thought for a long time and chose the forcing continuation, bishop takes b3. And I chose this variation based in part on a miscalculation, which I'll show you. So in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best decision. I probably should have settled here for bishop c4 with a roughly equal position. But I played bishop takes b3, forcing the pawn to recapture, and now I went for it with the sacrifice, rook takes knight on c3. It's a very common sacrifice in the dragon. Very often, black sacrifices that exchange along the open c-file, and in return is able to pick up the pawn on e4 with the knight and have excellent central control. So after b takes c3, I played knight takes e4, and I liked my position because I didn't think that c takes b4 was very serious here because I'm able to capture the rook on a1 with my bishop, and also the white bishop on g5 is hanging. And I thought, you know, if white does something here to save the bishop on g5, I'm just going to take on c3. I'll have 2 pawns for the exchange, and I should have a great position. So I was very happy at this point. But my opponent found an excellent continuation for white that I think gives white a little bit of an advantage. So this would be a good chance to pause the video here and see if you can find how white should continue in this position. So Daniel Naroditsky played c takes b4. I have to go bishop takes on a1, and now a nice move, bishop h6, putting pressure on the rook. Now I saw this, but I didn't think it was a problem because I thought I can just block bishop g7. And now if bishop takes g7, king takes g7, I saw that queen d4 check, it's no problem because I can simply play knight f6 and block and everything is fine. I have an extra pawn. But I missed that in this position, white has a very powerful move, queen to d5. The idea is to fork the knight with the pawn on b7, and after I move my knight away and the queen takes on b7, all of a sudden I didn't like my position because white's queenside pawns are very powerful with the help of his bishop, and I think it's going to be bad news for black. So I realized after bishop h6 that bishop g7 probably didn't really work, so I decided to sacrifice the exchange. I played bishop to e5. So very often in these kinds of positions, black can sacrifice the exchange and still have very good compensation. In this case, my bishop on e5 is very strong, as is my knight on e4, and there are a lot of possibilities here to create some counterplay for black. So white continued pawn takes on g6. I take back with the h-pawn, and now an interesting move, bishop d3, attacking the knight. But I knew that I didn't really have time to retreat here, or else white was going to get a good position. So I came up with an interesting idea to play e6, intending queen h4. So for example, if white captures on e4, queen h4 now with a triple threat, the mate on h2, as well as both bishops are under attack, and I think my play here will be very good. So after e6, the game continued queen g4, preventing black from playing queen h4. I played knight f6 back, queen h3, and here, unfortunately, I still don't have time to save my rook with rook e8, because after bishop g5, the pressure on my pinned knight will become unbearable after queen h4, for example. So I play queen to b6. Now white takes the rook, king takes, pawn takes a5, queen takes b3, and after bishop b5, we got into this ending, which I feel is roughly equal. Of course, white's pawn structure is very bad, but the danger is that if white can do something about black's pawn on b7, the passed a-pawns can be lethal here. If I can survive the passed a-pawns, the connected passed pawns in the center should be very strong for black. So it's kind of a double-edged position, and if you're interested, you can go ahead and take a look at the game. The PGN is saved here, but I'm going to stop here. I ended up losing this game. Daniel Naroditsky played very well and outplayed me in this ending, and full credit to him, but I probably could have played a little bit better because I think at this moment, the position for black is still okay. So that concludes the analysis for this video on the classical system. To recap, the classical system is where white plays his bishop to e2 on move 6 after the dragon, with the idea to bring his dark square bishop either to e3 or to g5. In this variation, white will castle kingside and usually play f4. It's nowhere near as dangerous as the Yugoslav attack, but it's nonetheless a solid setup for white. But I think with accurate play by black, developing his pieces to natural squares, using that c-file for the rook, I don't think that black really has anything to worry about in this line. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you with another video shortly.
Right. establish a good position. Here. No strong move should black white complicate this tricky position.
Stupid! Nope. Nope.